So just one thing to tell you, perhaps you may delay a little bit your right on this side. Because the crowd is just
back down this hill.
No. Coming down the grass.
Oh.
Go around.
Can I go the next one?
very dangerous place for that part of the body.
Oh, yes, yes. But it was fantastic. 2 weeks ago. Yeah, beautiful. I didn't go to booth.
The 80th anniversary of D-Day, the largest seaborne invasion in history, a day when troops crossed the English Channel to northern France and turned the tide of World War II. We are gathered here today at the Embassy of France to pay tribute to these brave soldiers who helped us liberate our country and our continent. We will be forever grateful. We owe them our freedom. It makes me smile to know that close to 140 US World War II veterans have attended the official commemoration ceremonies in France today. While I would have loved to dance the swing with them at the embassy tonight, it is only right that they should be in Normandy, receiving special recognition from US and French officials, as well as members of the international community. The images of the warm welcome they received from the people of Normandy are extremely moving. I mentioned the swing because we will take a trip back in time to the swing era in a few minutes. 1944 liberation of Paris was one of the most joyful moments in French history. There was celebrating and dancing and laughing in the streets, much like there will be tonight. The joy that the citizens of France felt that day would not have been possible without the bravery and determination of the Allied leaders, soldiers, special forces, sailors, pilots, medics, and nurses. Tonight's special performance and jazz ball is also a way for us to pay tribute to the sacrifices made by those young men and women. They sacrificed their lives so that we could enjoy decades of peace, prosperity, and liberty. I'd like to thank Task Force Geronimo, the team behind tonight's moving reenactment, as well as Dr. Frank Blazik, curator of modern military history at the National Museum of American History, who will guide us from the shores of Normandy to the streets of Paris. My special thanks also go to our DC-based band Verono, featuring award-winning vocalist Lynn Verono, guitarist Ken Avis, and guitarist Michael Joseph Harris of Baltimore's Hot Club. I thank them for providing the fabulous music tonight, and I also want to thank Fidgety Feet, who will teach us how to dance swing later in the evening. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our D-Day event sponsors, Saint-Gobain, GE Aerospace, Delta Airlines, NG, Airbus, Ariane Espace, Thales, BNP Paribas, Alstom, Michelin, Orano, Schneider Electric, Total Energy, Pernod Ricard, and Safran. None of this would have been possible without their support, and we are honored by their efforts to keep the memory of these historic events alive. I also want to thank our director, Baudouin Carrard, tonight. He's just here. Lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here tonight. I hope I'll see you on the dance floor. And now I'll hand it over to our master storyteller, Frank Blazik, Dr. Frank Blazik. We are in for quite a treat. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Your Excellency. We gather here tonight to remember events of 80 years ago, when the military forces of the Allied nations landed in Nazi-occupied France to return democracy after 4 years of occupied darkness. From landings in Normandy on June 6th and in Provence on August 15th, Paris, the glorious city of lights, would be liberated on August 25th. As we gather to celebrate these three events, please join us for a theatrical time-traveling adventure. It is June 1944. For 4 years, darkness has enveloped Western Europe. But now, the armed forces of the United States, Free France, Great Britain, Canada, and Free Poland stood poised to launch the greatest amphibious invasion in world history. By air, sea, and land, the Allied expeditionary forces would cross the English Channel and seize a foothold on the European continent, from where they would advance until final victory in Berlin. The supreme commander of the Allies was a 53-year-old American general, born in Texas and raised in Kansas, Dwight David Eisenhower.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. In company with our brave allies and brothers in arms on other fronts, you will bring about the destruction of the German war machine, the elimination of Nazi tyranny over the oppressed peoples of Europe, and security for ourselves in a free world. Your task will not be an easy one. Your enemy is well-trained, well-equipped, and battle-hardened. He will fight savagely. But this is the year 1944. Much has happened since the Nazi triumphs of 1940-41. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats in open battle, man to man. Our air offensive has seriously reduced their strength in the air and their capacity to wage war on the ground. Our home fronts have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war, and placed at our disposal great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together to victory. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessing of Almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking.
Just after midnight, 6 June, anti-aircraft fire slashes across the blackness of Normandy as a tremendous aerial armada of transport aircraft roar overhead, discharging tens of thousands of paratroopers. Their formations scattered in the confusion of battle, men land everywhere. Searching for friendly soldiers, small bands of paratroopers form up to seize objectives inland, which are critical for the success of the seaborne landings. Following the paratroopers, Waves of gliders loaded with infantry, jeep, artillery, and supplies silently sliced through the air before touching down on French soil. Made of only tubular steel, plywood, and canvas, the gliders had an ominous nickname, Flying Coffins. Out in the English Channel, soldiers check weapons, attach upwards of 60 pounds of ammunition and equipment to their persons, and clamber down cargo nets into landing craft bouncing around in the choppy seas. Between the rumble of engines, shouts of orders, and clanking of equipment is mixed the smell of cigarette smoke, diesel exhaust, salt air, musty canvas, nausea, and fear. Some men have never heard a shot fired in anger, and yet the supreme hour is upon them. Some men pray, others clutch lucky trinkets, while still others peer out in the gray dusk to the darkened shoreline in the distance. Farther east of the American landing beaches at Omaha and Utah, Canadian forces head ashore at Juno Beach. British forces head to Gold and Sword Beaches. In the landing craft of the first wave at Sword Beach are a group of 177 Free French commandos, led by the indomitable Capitaine de Corvette Philippe Kiefer. For the men of Commando Kiefer, the invasion is deeply personal. As the landing craft chug in the surf toward the shores, medium and heavy bombers high aloft drop thousands of tons of bombs on enemy defenses. Naval artillery and rocket ships unleash a thunderous wall of steel and explosives shoreward. It is hoped that the fire will destroy beach obstacles and provide protective cover on the shoreline for the infantry forces. Months of careful planning, training, and rehearsals orchestrated by Eisenhower's headquarters have attempted to prepare the invasion forces for everything. But even the best laid plans can and will go awry. As the ramps of the landing craft drop down, heavily armed men wade ashore on a foreign land. For those soldiers in the first wave, the scene before them is not what they expected. Enemy beach obstacles, bunkers, and pillboxes are intact. In the smoky air, hundreds of pairs of enemy eyes gaze at the landing soldiers. Loading their weapons, they choose their targets and take aim. For the men of Commando Kiefer, several of the Green Berets pause to kiss the sand of France. Having experienced some of the toughest military training in the world, these fearless fighters now return as liberators. But for the Americans at Omaha Beach, bullets and exploding shells pelt every inch of the sand. Explosions, screams, shouts, roaring engines, flashing waves, smoke, fire, and confusion. Radio communications with the invasion beach are limited. Tank and naval gunfire support is at first sporadic. Casualties begin to mount. There are but two kinds of men on this beach, those who are dead and those who are about to die. Despite a rain of bullets and exploding shells originating from a German bunker, the paratroopers and the infantry begin to coordinate their efforts to eliminate the threat. As the infantry provides suppressing rifle fire to pin the enemy in his bunker, paratroopers maneuver closer to the fortification and its opening firing port. Armed with a bazooka, one man loads the weapon while the gunner takes aim, and with the great whoosh, the rocket flies forth from the weapon and strikes home. A great roar of flame and rain of debris pelt the prostrate Americans. The German machine gun is silent. The way inland is clear. Farther west at Sword Beach, Kiefer and his commandos, undeterred by mortar and sniper fire, race to their primary objective of the silencing the German battery at the River Bella Casino at Ostraham. One commando commented, "It will be a pleasure. I have lost many fortunes in that place." The casino, once a house where some fortunes were made and countless others lost, is now a concrete reinforced strongpoint for the Germans, an interconnected series of bunkers with machine guns and cannon. Kiefer, already wounded from the beach landing, connects with members of the resistance, who inform the commando officer that the electrical cables to the casino have been cut. disabling some of the German cannon. With this information in hand, the French commandos assault the casino and systematically begin to clear out the Germans.
Ami, entends-tu le vol noir des corbeaux sur nos plaines? Ami, entends-tu les cris sourds du pays qu'on enchaîne? Poètes, partisans, ouvriers, paysans, c'est l'alarme. Ce soir, l'ennemi connaîtra le prix du sang et des larmes. Ici, chacun sait ce qu'il veut, ce qu'il fait quand il passe. Ami, si tu tombes, un ami sort de l'ombre à ta place. Demain, du sang noir séchera au grand soleil sur les routes. Sifflez, compagnons, dans la nuit, la liberté nous écoute.
June through July, the fighting in Normandy is hard, bloody, and slow. The formidable hedgerows and tenacious defenses are preventing the Allies from exploiting their advantages in mechanized forces to break out into open country and move on Paris. With British General Bernard Montgomery holding back Panzer divisions at Caen, American General Omar Bradley crafts a plan to use heavy bombers to blast a half-a-mile hole in the German lines near Saint-Lô. While risky and unorthodox, the plan works. By the start of August, the Allies have broken out of Normandy. The Germans are in retreat, and the road to Paris is open.
There was a little girl who lived next to me, and she loved a sailor.
On August 15th in Paris, the metro workers and police go on strike. By the 18th, more workers in the city are striking. Back on June 5th, British radio broadcast a message to the French resistance. Laissons manquer, yon langueur, monotone. The code to commence sabotage operations against the fascist occupiers. Now, with the fate of Paris in the balance, the resistance forces in the city seize their arms and rise up. Gun battles break out around the city as resistance barricades and checkpoints appear. On the 24th, French General Philippe Leclerc orders a vanguard force of the 2nd Armored Division to enter the city. That night, the tanks, half-tracks, trucks, and jeeps of the division reach the center of Paris.
She loves her sailor, and he loves her too.
Everywhere her sailor
On the afternoon of the 25th, the German occupiers surrendered to General Leclerc. That same day, General Charles de Gaulle, leader of the Free French forces, returns to the city he had to leave 4 years before. Leclerc, together with American General Omar Bradley, on behalf of the American 4th Infantry Division, are greeted with joyous shouts, kisses, and the warm embrace of freedom as they salute General de Gaulle.
She is hopeful he will soon come home safe again.
And I'm working with the French-American Documentary Alliance, and we're telling the story of Paris, of France, and the United States, and the story of democracy, and how it came to be. And one of the greatest stories in that trilogy is the story of jazz in France. I'll begin by asking jazz itself a question. Were you there when Paris was set free? On August 26, 1944, when General de Gaulle and the French 2nd Armored Division marched down the Champs-Élysées, jazz, were you there?
Yes.
The day before, the General famously said Paris. Paris outraged, Paris broken, Paris betrayed, but Paris liberated. Were you there, jazz, when Paris was set free? Of course you were. In the dark days of Nazi occupation, not only did you endure, you thrived. Despite your denigration by Nazi propaganda in the most vile terms, despite Nazi officers filling the nightclubs, you brought solace, you brought joy, you helped the heart of Paris continue to beat. Yes, you were there. You were there with Josephine Baker as she served the resistance. Improvising a double life as a spy, harvesting secrets in the embassy ballrooms and dance halls of wartime Europe. You were there with the young Juliette Greco, who as a teenager was arrested and tortured by the Gestapo, and after months of prison, walked alone into Paris on a bitterly cold autumn day, wearing only a light summer dress. She would become the icon and muse of post-war jazz in Paris. You were there with Arthur Briggs, the American trumpet player who had called Paris home since the 1920s, whose trumpet kept him alive in the concentration camp where he was held, entertaining his Nazi captors. Jazz, you were there with Django Reinhardt, who tried to escape Paris twice after being captured and released by a Nazi officer who happened to be a fan. Django's performing never stopped, but as a Romany, he lived in constant fear. Jazz, you were there when Paris was set free. On June 6, 1944, the Americans, the Canadians, and the British came ashore at Normandy. Jazz, you first came to France 26 years before. And we can tell that story by beginning where we are tonight, right here in this room. Because the story of how jazz got to France begins in Washington, D.C. Just a few miles from where we stand on what used to be known as B Street Southeast, but is now Independence Avenue. On this block, in this house, lived a young African-American boy from Mobile, Alabama, who had dreams of becoming a His name was James Reese Europe. He wanted to be the greatest band leader in America, and it was very handy for young Mr. Europe that just 4 doors down at 618 B Street lived the greatest band leader in America, John Philip Sousa. Mr. Europe immersed himself in the vernacular music of America, in this new syncopated black American music called jazz. And he created the 125-member Cliff Club Orchestra, the first black orchestra to play Carnegie Hall. And when the war began, Americans volunteered. They volunteered in 1914 to drive out ambulances, fight in the trenches with the Foreign Legion, and fly fighter aircraft with the Service Aeronautique. And James Reese Europe enlisted as soon as the United States entered the war, but not as a musician, but as a member of the 369th Infantry Unit, the Harlem Hellfighters. And when his commanding officer realized that he had the great James Reese Europe signed up as a machine gunner, he told him, "I want the best damn band in the Army." And that's what he got. And so when jazz came ashore in France in January 1918, and the soldiers disembarked in Brest with their instruments, they went on a 2,000-mile tour of France, and jazz had finally arrived. For the first time, the blues was heard in Europe. They played for wounded soldiers. They played for 50,000 people in the Tuileries Gardens. And then they put down their instruments and they went into the trenches. And the Harlem Hellfighters were not allowed to fight under American command because they were black. So they fought under French command, and they were the most decorated unit in the American military in World War I. And black soldiers discovered a haven in France where they could play their music and live their lives in freedom. And that was very handy for Paris, because Paris really needed to party. Pay attention to that drummer. He's one of the most important characters in this whole story. Because he had left South Carolina as a teenager and gone to Europe and fought for 4 years in World War I. He survived the Battle of Verdun. He joined the Service Aeronautique, and he became the first black fighter pilot. His name was Eugene Jacques Bullard. And Jacques Bullard, after the war ended, became one of the finest impresarios of jazz in Paris. He was everywhere, and he was everything to everybody. You see him sitting behind his drum set in the black musician colony that was growing all the time in Paris, and sitting next to him, holding his trumpet, was his dear friend, was his dear friend Arthur Briggs. Briggs was the Louis Armstrong of Europe. And Bullard hired Ada Beatrice Queen Victoria Louise Virginia Smith to sing at his club, the Grand Duke, but she was better known for her red hair and was called Bricktop. And everybody went to Bricktops. And when we think of Paris in the 20s, and we think of those glittering night spots, what we're thinking of is Bricktops. Of course, the one icon of jazz in Paris at this time was a 19-year-old from St. Louis who Bricktop took under her wing. She showed up to perform in a show called the Revue Negre, and she was, of course, Josephine Baker. Her dancing, her persona riveted Paris. Her dancing was, shall we say, hypnotic. Who else could, wear that banana suit? Who else could parade down the Champs-Élysées with her pet cheetah named Chiquita? Josephine Baker embodied jazz in Paris. And the great ones continued to come. Duke Ellington in 1933. For the very first time, he was not just recognized as the leader of a popular dance band, but as the great composer he was. And he didn't play the small clubs in Paris. He played the Salle Pleyel. Forevermore, Duke Ellington would be known as a composer first. And the greatness of this American art was embraced in Paris. Louis Armstrong arrived the next year in 1934 to convalesce from a grueling European tour. And he made a discovery of his own, a brand new sound in this music that he helped invent. And it was a French sound. Here it is in his own words. I hope you can hear it.
I met Django Reinhardt during that time in Paris. When he first went there. He knocked me out. Ooh, oh, that cat sure could play.
That cat sure could play, couldn't he? His music came from his life as a manouche, as a child playing on the streets of Paris, and coming from the squalor of La Zone. He also met another street musician in Paris, one who had been trained in the conservatory, Stéphane Grappelli, and the two of them created a new sound in jazz, all strings, all French, based in the blues, of extraordinary rhythmic and harmonic complexity, and so perfect for dancing as you soon will. This was the famous Quintet de Hop Club de France, and it changed the sound of the music forever. When Duke Ellington first heard Django Reinhardt, he wanted to hire him on the spot, but that didn't quite happen, because the dark time came. And when the Nazis occupied Paris, jazz, this degenerate, disgusting music of animals, was shut down. And the nightclubs were closed. And the theaters were closed. But even Joseph Goebbels could not restrain his own soldiers from wanting to be entertained. And slowly the nightclubs opened. And slowly the theaters opened. And Django continued to play. And the teenagers adopted the fashions of their hero Cab Calloway, and they called themselves the Zazous. And if a Zazous was trapped on a Parisian street corner by the Jeunesse de France, the young fascists, they would have their head shaved, but they continued to dress. And their watchword, which meant freedom, was swing. And Django continued to compose, and he wrote Nuage, a beautiful song that became the unofficial anthem of the French resistance. And when liberation happened, the center of jazz in Paris moved to the left bank, and it was a glorious moment. Because the young people took it over and made dancing, hang on a second, and made it come alive again with their great dancing. And a whole new young wave of young American musicians came. Dexter Gordon, John Lewis, so many others. And a young Miles Davis fell in love with the muse of the left bank, Juliette Greco, and hung out with Boris Vian. And for the first time in his life, he felt that freedom. And here's the thing, folks, it's still happening. Over 100 years later, the heart of jazz is beating and is alive and well. It tells us something about who we are. It is the purest form of democracy. Because on the bandstand, all that matters is that you have to be able to play. And your voice counts. And your voice has to play with all the other voices. You have to speak your voice, but listen to the others and make it work. Because if it doesn't, as Duke Ellington told us, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. And so to wrap up, I'll bring some of our leaders talking about this idea, and then we'll bring on the band.
The story of France and the
séquences, on fait une partie.
Otherwise,
I understand that it won't be possible for my group that you do the curriculum because you are focusing on local sports. But in case you have weekend events, I think there will be more than interest.
Like, share, and subscribe for more videos. See you around.